This next conversation talks about suicide. It's an important conversation, but I realise that it's not for everyone. It's a tough topic at best. So if the issue of suicide is likely to trigger you, you feel free to step away if you need to. Turn us down for the next 10 minutes or so. All too often our communities are faced with suicide, that choice that someone makes to end their own life. It's never an easy subject to talk about, but it sure is an important one, especially if it could help us be more alert to someone who is considering this action and to better prepare us to help those in need and to offer those in need more help. Lifeline North Coast is very aware that they have a high rate of suicide in the local area, and so they've decided to take a very proactive approach to help train people in community to become suicide alert helpers. And Jenna McBeath is the Crisis Support and Suicide Prevention Manager at Lifeline North Coast and is rolling out this very special training across her region. Jenna, hello.
Hello, and thank you for having me today to discuss this very important topic, as you mentioned in your introduction.
It is so important to talk about. Tell us about your local area. How big an area do you cover, and what has the rate of suicide been like for you in your area?
Sure. Lifeline North Coast covers, our centre is based in Coffs Harbour, but we cover anywhere from Nambucca Heads up past Yamba and Maclean in the north coast of New South Wales. It's been identified as one of the regions with a disproportionately high rate of suicide. So I guess to give a comparison, the national average rate of suicide is between 8 and 9 per 100,000, and in the north coast of New South Wales, over the last couple of years, it's been sitting at over 20 per 100,000. So it's more than double the national average, and it's obviously been a geographical area of concern for that reason.
Do we know why those numbers are so high on the North Coast? Why is your local area so badly impacted by suicide?
I think it's a combination of factors, and it's actually a really good question. Some of it is, I guess, to do with lack of service availability in regional areas. So, as you probably are aware, a lot of the GPs have closed their books, a lot of the psychologists have closed their books. They're not taking new patients, they're not taking new clients. If they are taking new clients, a lot of them are cost prohibitive for a lot of everyday families. So one factor is the accessibility for services. The other, and I've made up my own term for this, but I've termed it calamity fatigue, which is over the last 4 or 5 years since we've seen a lack of normalcy in our lives. So especially in the North Coast, but also nationwide, we've had bushfires, and then we've had floods, multiple floods. We've had COVID in the background of all of that as well, and then now we're back to a bushfire danger. So I call it calamity fatigue because members of the community are getting really tired. They're getting really tired of all of these disasters and all of these calamities happening, and then when you add in external stresses over the top, like cost of living, housing crises, I think their resilience is starting to become quite low, and they're starting to not be able to cope with things anymore.
It's a great term, really, because it's not a laughing matter, but it's nearly laughable to consider
Absolutely.
What your community in particular has been facing.
Absolutely, and sometimes they even joke, "What's next?" And locusts or
Yes.
Absolutely. It's just it is this sort of hypervigilance and this sense of what next. But I really have noticed a high level of distress in the community and a lower level of distress tolerance and coping skills. People are just really, really weary from all of that.
And fair enough too. Jenna, have you got an insight into which groups are most at risk of suicide across the North Coast?
Yeah, so across the North Coast, and actually also nationwide, it's predominantly men who are choosing to take their own lives. That's skewed almost sort of 85% men. So it is obviously a population at risk. In the North Coast, over the last couple of years, it's been men between 25 and 54. And we've also noticed in the last year or two, it's been men 25 to 54 who might be working in a construction or a trade industry. Other areas that we've identified have been First Nation population and members of the LGBTQIA plus community as well.
We often hear men traditionally don't ask to go, or go and get help. Or they don't ask for help. They don't seek support. Is that true? Is that why you think we're seeing such high numbers of men choose suicide?
This is a really good point that you make, actually, because there is a misconception that men don't seek out help, but the research actually shows they do seek help, but they're most likely to only seek help once. So they might try a counsellor or a GP or a psychologist, and if they don't find it helpful, that's the end of their help-seeking behaviour. So then you might find a client or a family that you're working with will say, I tried counselling, it didn't work for me, it was rubbish, so I'm not open to trying it again. So they are seeking help, but they're only seeking help the one time, where you or I might go, okay, well, we didn't gel with that person, we might try someone else. And if we don't gel with that person, we might try someone else. So, it's a really interesting misconception, and there is some behavioural patterns there that the research shows.
It also puts a huge amount of, that's a huge impact that first appointment needs to have, isn't it?
Yes, yes. Absolutely, yes. Couldn't agree more. Yes, it's
a lot of pressure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and particularly pressure on, I guess, the practitioner and rapport building, and like we were saying before, that's not always easy in a remote and regional area where you may not be able, there's not that many practitioners to choose from, and there may not be a practitioner that specialises in your area of distress.
And let alone getting into one, in a timely manner as well.
Correct. Yes, absolutely right.
Well, this is sort of where your training is coming in. And Jenna McBeath is our guest. She's a crisis supporter and suicide prevention manager with Lifeline on the North Coast. The training is called Safe Talk. Tell us about it. What happens? What do you focus on in this?
So Safe Talk is a 4-hour suicide prevention training which was developed by Living Work. So it's aimed at upskilling members of the community to become suicide alert helpers in the community. So what's really great about it is that it's not pitched at practitioners, it's pitched at everyday people, so that everyday people can acquire the skills to respond sensitively to people who are having thoughts of suicide.
In the training, you outline certain cues that we should be aware of. Could you share with us some of those?
Sure. It was, I guess, based on the premise that in a lot of our daily conversations and everyday conversation, people do drop in invitations that they're struggling that might be easy enough to gloss over when we're just conversing with a friend or a relative. So people might say things like, "Oh, well, there's just no point anyway," or why bother, or it doesn't even matter, or things like I just want to sleep forever. So sometimes, and thank goodness, our brain doesn't automatically default to thinking that someone is considering suicide. So it is quite easy to gloss over some of these invitations when they come up in conversation. But it really is about being able to, okay, well, you've just said there's no point anymore. Could you tell me a bit more about what you mean by that? And giving them the time and space to be able to explore and unpack what they might actually be feeling, and giving them the space to say, well, actually, I am having thoughts of taking my own life. So
it's gently acknowledging the cues and potentially talking about it. It's taking that next step to actually ask.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and just really fine-tuning into these invitations that pop up. And actually, once you start looking for them, they actually pop up more often than you would anticipate, actually.
Mm. So now we're listening for those cues. I mean, in your opinion, how can these cues also make a difference, I guess, in potentially saving someone's life?
I guess by not glossing over these invitations, like we were mentioning before, it really does give an entry point into the conversation about how someone is really doing, and it gives the space to ask about any suicidal thought or intent. This
sort of training, Jenna, I mean, it seems like 4 hours, very achievable. Can anyone come along? What sort of ages are you hoping people will consider this?
That's the great thing. Like I mentioned before, it's not pitched at practitioners. It's pitched at everyday people. So anyone over the age of 15 can attend, which is really great. And teaching people to look after their mates, their relatives, their families, people that they come in contact with, things that people, and that sometimes extends to, I guess, frontline facing occupations. You know, we tell our hairdressers everything. We might tell people at a restaurant or the bar staff or what have you. There's lots of opportunities for people in occupations that deal with a lot of people in a frontline capacity.
This is free training and just 4 hours, like you say. Do you think this is also helpful to help destigmatise talking about suicide and mental health and make sure that we are continuing to bring it into the mainstream?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's so important to be able to talk about suicide in a non-alarmist manner. I think a lot of people, and my previous job was at standby support after suicide, so supporting those who had lost someone to suicide. So I think in terms of destigmatising suicide, it really provides an opportunity to speak about it in a more open manner.
So we're obviously talking North Coast Lifeline training at the moment. You're rolling out in Moulder this week. Where else can people in your area seek out the Safe Talk training?
Yes, so we're rolling out in Moulder this week. In March, it will be in Yamba. April will be in Coffs Harbour. May will be in Grafton, and that's specifically working with vulnerable LGBTQIA communities. And in May, it will be Maclean, and that will be a safe yarn, and that's specifically working with First Nations communities. And then the next step up from Safe Talk is called Assist, which is Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. And that's a 2-day workshop aimed, I guess, a bit more at practitioners, and that will be running in Grafton in June as well. So all of those training dates and registration links are available at our website, so lifelinenorthcoast.org.au.
Could other Lifeline regions be providing similar if we're outside of the North Coast and interested in getting Safe Talk into a community near us?
Yes, absolutely. And so for anyone interested in organising training for their communities, the best way to go about that is to get onto the Living Works website. And they are currently they've got some funded Safe Talk opportunities for communities, and are also promoting, they've got a 90-minute suicide prevention SMART training, and that's currently free for community members as well.
I'm thinking this would be awesome opportunity for some workplaces to have, like they often will have a first aid officer, to have someone who's done Safe Talk as well.
Yes.
Do you often see businesses engaging in this style of training?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And particularly, like we were talking about before, the businesses that are in front-facing professions, and so not just in the welfare sector, but even occupations that don't typically come to mind when you think suicide prevention, but hairdressers, vets, doctors,
beauticians. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, places where people go and, I guess, get their chat on.
Well, so appreciative for you to share with us the work that you're doing for the Safe Talk and Assist training as well. It's a tough job that you have, Jenna. How do you decompress? It is a tough job, but I guess I've learnt over time that I'm walking alongside people with their pain, and I've learnt sort of, I guess, skills to not take their pain on. But then I just do the usual things to decompress. I've got three rescue dogs, so spend time at the beach, spend time outside, and just try to look after myself that way. Making such a difference for your community. Lovely to meet you this afternoon, Jenna McBeath. Thank you.
And thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate the opportunity.
It's our privilege. From Lifeline North Coast, that's Jenna McBeath, and more details via Lifeline And of course, if you or someone you know is feeling overwhelmed, we do encourage you to connect with Lifeline in the way that you feel most comfortable. There are a number of ways to do that. You can speak to a crisis supporter, 13 11 14. They have a text number as well, which is 0477 131 114, or you can chat online, lifeline.org.au, and those two series of workshops that are being rolled out, Safe Talk and Assist. So keep that in mind.